Okay, thank you so much, our guests for the day. Today we are here with our able colleague and partner in child protection and safeguarding, and we are looking into the issue of the developments on the child protection policy that is being spearheaded by a government agency, that is the National Council of Children's Services. As we are all aware, is that the legal space within our country changed after the coming of the 2010 Constitution, and of course, the issues around children to change with the coming of the Children's Act of 2022. So, with us here, we have an able colleague who's been in the sector for a very long time, will be taking us through the policy as it is right now and emerging opportunities which we as civil society actors and child protection practitioners, we can leverage on so that we can have a policy that is sound and reflects on the aspirations and the needs of our children. So without wasting much time, I'd want to welcome our guest for the day to take it from me and to take us through the background on the Child Protection Policy 2010, and of course delve further to guide us on the opportunity that are emanating from the new development in policies and legal framework. Karibu, Mr. Paul.
Thank you very much, Nolly. I'll go straight ahead to first. My discussion will be structured in the following manner. The first part, I'll basically give a great overview or a grand overview of the policy for children, or the National Children's Policy. And then I'll come to discuss certain sections of that policy which have evolved since 2010. Then I'll look at very specific areas that we think we can draw lessons. Finally, I'll look at the current challenges, or the challenges that we are likely to be facing, contemporary challenges. And finally, I'll ask for question and answer from anybody available. So let's first start by discussing the policy and lawmaking in general. Number one, why is it then that it's the National Children's Services that develop this policy, and not, as many cases people wonder, the Department of Children's Services, or as we call them now, the Directorate of Children's Services? The answer lies on one thing which has evaded a lot of persons playing in the child subsector region. One, all issues and matters related to children are set out at the National Council for Children's Services. They are the ones mandated by law to take care of issues related with children, and therefore they are the overall authority on matters related with children. Any other players only play a part in developing or in reaching out. So in terms of policy development, the National Council for Children's Services are the overall leaders. In terms of then policy implementation, the Directorate of Children's Services and other sectors, including health, education, social services, then become just implementers of these policies. Among other implementers, of course, civil society organizations, parents, and other related organizations and institutions. So that forms a little bit of history and why then the National Children's Council was in charge. The second part is that in developing a policy framework, the government of Kenya took it upon itself to develop what we call accountability documents, which will enable the government and any other players to understand that when dealing with children within any other subsectors that I'll mention later on, then you must know that there's a policy framework within which your actions will be held accountable for yourself, and secondly, within which then your acts will be deemed legitimate or legalized for that matter. So that's forms the first basis for developing that policy. And it is from that policy that then different acts or different pieces of legislations or statutory laws are then drawn for use in implementing that specific policy. The big policy framework is then the policy that was formed in 2010, but the various policies now come in as pieces of legislation within the various dockets, like Ministry of Health, Education, anything to do with the parental, any policy on parents or parental guidance and care, anything on culture, anything on drugs and substance abuse, anything on child trafficking or child labor, anything on impact on ICT. So these different ones are then drawn from the main policy that was developed in 2010. So let me go now to the 2010 policy. The 2010 policy is structured using the existing frameworks on child protection, which means survival, development, protection, and child participation. So these four form the basis areas within which the policy derives its implementable actions or actionables, for lack of words to explain. And therefore, the policy strictly and highly goes directly to explain what it expects from each of these specific areas. It is then divided into those sections, with section 3.1 being specifically on survival, or 3 being survival, 4 on areas of education and related areas, 5 on protection, and 6 on the areas of child participation. Now, allow me then to not necessarily share, but to explain certain areas that we feel have been highlighted in this. For example, section 3.1 talks about health, and health as of 2010 related a lot to, with areas of matters to do with HIV and AIDS, which was a big issue at about that time. Of course, right now, talking about health is totally different issue. HIV and AIDS will probably not rank above everything else in terms of health. The other area then was on education. Then we have leisure, recreation, and play, socialization, parental care, and access to information, then cultural rights. And then in protection, we have identification and registration of children, and drugs and substance abuse. 5.3 was physical abuse, then child labor, child trafficking, among others. And one that stands out is the impact of ICT as it was described in 2010. So from my own perspective and over the last years, I wish briefly to describe each of the areas and just draw what we consider then new changes. And then I'll mention what are then new challenges for us to just have a look. Let's start with education. Over the last 13 years, from 2010 to now, there's just been a change of education system. The way you look at education has slightly changed. We are changing now from the 844 system to the CBC system, which is not necessarily a system. It's a new curriculum, which in the past we were looking at life skills, but right now we're looking at competency skills. The difference being ability to live, and right now ability to manage oneself using both talented skills and learned skills in the new direction. The challenge right now in education subsector, as it involves children, is that it's not the children who are suffering the consequences of the change or the transition in education system. It is more the parents and other stakeholders that are having problem. In general, and from my perception, is that children are pretty happy with the change in curriculum because it offers them ability to learn with what they have and to be able to use their talent and other skills besides the usual rote learning that was in the previous education curriculum. Notwithstanding, of course, the numerous challenges that the CBC is posing to our country. The second area will be on issues of recreation, leisure, recreation, and play. In many ways, traditionally, we've considered these basically sporting events, and we've not quite been very innovative as a country to look at other forms of leisure or recreational and play. We've always said, okay, children should play football and play basketball and handball and field games and internal games. However, the general tone ought to be to look at other forms of leisure and recreation and play that go beyond that, those specific ones. So through institutional centers, these are the nature of plays that have existed. The next one is on socialization and parental care. It's my estimation that this perhaps has been the weakest part of implementation of the National Children Policy, because parents have in many ways neglected their specific role of taking care of children. Maybe I'm being a little harsh, but however, if apportioning blame was to be done, then parents bear the biggest burden for neglecting their part in proper parenting. Our form of parenting, and in general, and given part of the studies that we've done, mainly in Kilifi County and parts of Mombasa, has been that the average parent uses punishment, violence, basically, to punish children whenever they go wrong, instead of other forms of disciplinary measures. The same goes down to schools, which this policy states schools should avoid corporal punishment, for instance, but this more accepted in breach than otherwise. I'll quickly go through the other parts on protection. Whereas identification, registration, drugs and substance abuse, physical abuse have been dealt with in a more holistic way, the area of child labor and trafficking of children still remains a challenge. And from where I work, because I basically work within that docket under child safeguarding, child labor, and particularly the worst forms of child labor, are emerging, where children become contributors to family incomes, which are beneath their ages. And this is not necessarily through working on the farm or working the fishing industry or mining or any other form, but including as worse forms of child labor as sexual exploitation or transactional sex for purposes of being earning an income to support their families. And this also goes with child trafficking, including begging on the street, forced begging on the street, where children are then used by their handlers, adults, to start begging on the street, where the beneficiaries are these adults. Finally, in terms of changes, and this pretty interesting that there was anticipatory of the impact of ICT, we are seeing an increased level of abuse and potential abuse in the digital world. And this goes beyond, on average, policies and laws seek to protect vulnerable children. When you say vulnerable children in the Kenyan context, we all often imagine that these are from poor backgrounds or from family with difficult circumstances. But on the digital world, any child with a mobile phone in their hands is potentially vulnerable to trafficking or to abuse on the digital platform. And there's going to be, in the coming years, more and more of abuse of children on the digital platform and in ICT and in the new media, the social media. Again, it is noteworthy to understand that 60% of the content created on the social media is created by children themselves. And when you say children, meaning persons under age of 18. So what are the new challenges that were perhaps not challenges 13 years ago or 12 years ago when the policy came up? The first one was the coming in of the pandemic. We had never anticipated a pandemic similar to COVID-19 that affected us in the past. And with it came even more forms of abuse that was perhaps never anticipated in the 2010 policy. One of them was abuse by family members. Many children are reporting being abused by very close relatives, grandfathers, fathers, stepfathers, brothers, cousins, uncles are abusing children. And more boys are finding themselves within this abuse network of perpetrators. And this can be attributed to the confinement of children with their parents during the COVID-19 pandemic period. And it is also during that same period that physical abuse on girls became rampant. And 250,000 girls, that's 250,000 girl children, became victims of child pregnancy. And that means there are 250,000 men out there who by law ought to be behind bars, but because of inability of our system to put them behind bars, they are scot-free. And as we know, whenever there's a perpetrator against children out there, and if they feel there's been impunity, they'll repeat themselves. So chances are we have more than 500,000 men out there. And these are men who are proven because the girls became pregnant. There could be much more because not every girl then became pregnant, that are out there that are potentially abusers of children. So this is very, very worrisome for us. The second thing is the unforeseen level of parents in taking care of children, in which many parents, they themselves, indicate levels of immoral behavior within social media, which ordinarily in the past was behind curtains, but now are increasingly becoming more and more seen in what families are calling women from a specific neighborhood or neighborhood code, or men from a specific neighborhood code, and they feel free and open to discuss matters that ordinarily would not be discussed in any public space, but which they are discussing in the digital space, and which are accessible to children, and which then form what by law should be considered abuse or exposure of children to abusive messaging. So having said that, these new challenges, I wish to open up to any questions to anybody who would like me to clarify in a space. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Paul, for that wonderful introduction. Maybe from your understanding and experience on policy development, as practitioners, what is the entry point that can be exploited to have the policy that will be developed from now, which I believe, if it happens to be developed within this year, it will be Child Protection Policy 2023. So what is the opportunity? What is the entry point? What can we leverage on to gain entry into this process?
Thank you very much, Noli. Citizens of Kenya have the best opportunities to participate under, in fact, under the constitution itself, because it anticipates citizens' participation in lawmaking. Now, in this specific sector, I must say we have a fairly vibrant group of civil society members who ordinarily take up the voices of children and issues related to children upfront. So in terms of that, first, the civil society organizes itself in the manner it has always done and presents its cases because it is based on practical experience, as we are practitioners in the community. And that is the first entry into this policy. The second one is that the policy obviously has a date within which it needs to be reviewed, and not every community member in the village understands that, but individuals within civil society do understand that. And again, if we just draw our review within the sectors that have just been mentioned in this particular sector, subsectors in health, education, and so on, it perfectly fits in there. The third thing, which I think perhaps will be most impactful, is to get the voices of children themselves on board. And this, again, civil society are the best place to do this because they do work with children and in an open-minded manner, not trying to herd children into a specific sector of thought or way of behavior. So these three will form perhaps the best spaces to get in for policy evaluation, because I do believe that we already have very strong policies on children and child protection, more so given the fact that we now have a new Children Act that have basically taken on board a number of the ideas that were in the earlier were in the policies of the 2010, the 2010 policy.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much. So there are some messages, there are some inquiries which are coming via our social media platform, so we might not be able to see them here with us. And the question goes like, with the new responsibility that has been bestowed to the counties through the Children's Act 2022 and the other roles that the county plays, will there be need of counties to having their own protection policies?
My belief is that counties are led from the day we put in the new act. Children basically belong to the counties, and issues on children are county related, and children suffer within counties. They don't suffer across the country, and every county has its own very delicate issues related to children. In Mombasa, for instance, forced street begging is a challenge. Children in the street is a challenge, and they've inherited this from the previous systems of administration. The counties ought to have taken this right from the very beginning. It's then no wonder that early education is given to them, and so they ought to have child protection policies from day one. Again, in the past, we've had, whenever there's a challenge of children, and I'll mention these two counties as an example, Mombasa and Uasin Gishu, where Eldoret is. The leadership consistently say that those children do not belong to those counties. And so in Eldoret, for instance, they put them in vehicles and put them in a bus to heading them towards a neighboring county or country, which was very unfortunate. In Mombasa, they didn't go that direction. But again, the consistent manner in which they treated any child who did not seem to be born from Mombasa as a foreign child, that was the most insensitive thing to do. And of course, we called them out on that. And of course, they changed their behavior. But even after changing their behavior, they did nothing else in supporting children, particularly children that grow up in the streets and children on the move, as you call them, children that live on the streets. So counties should take laws to protect children within their counties.
Thank you so much for that emphasis and clarification that children belong to the counties. Another issue, another inquiry is on child participation, and we are aware that most of us partners usually mobilize child participation through institution of learning, and you'll agree with me that there are children who are not lucky to be in learning institutions, or rather, not all institutions of learning are being reached by partners and stakeholders who are able to run activities that are aimed at child participation. And also, of course, with the children assembly that we have, the children are not having an opportunity to be meeting as frequently as it's supposed to be. It's only one time, once in a while, while there are holidays, meeting for a week or so. And now my question is, how can we enhance the opportunity for meaningfully and proper participation of children in the development of our forthcoming child protection policy? Paul.
Thank you very much, Noli, on that. Child participation has always been one of my, let me call it, one of those, my passion. The idea is that every child's voice ought to be heard, and not just heard in organized meetings. And sometimes children speak best when they are not in any organized form, they're not in any institution, they're not in any conference of children, but when they're just playing, when they're just at home with their families, when they're just watching a match with their friends, and if there is deliberate need to pick children's voices, those are the opportunities that need to be taken into consideration. Of course, many adults will look at their personal upbringing and consider it appropriate for children, because they say, oh, I was brought up in this manner, therefore. But the truth is, children have their own minds, they have their own ideas, They have their own sense of how the world ought to look like. And the best thing that adults can do is just to provide guidance towards what is appropriate, morally right, and of course, legally correct. And these opportunities are numerous. It's only that many adults are too busy, and they're too busy doing anything else but taking care of children, which is one of our biggest responsibilities as adults, and particularly as parents. So these opportunities ought to be there and ought to be very deliberate. And that's part of the reason I suggest that counties ought to take lead in that, so that issues relating to children within counties make sense to children in that same county. Let's take a quick example of Mombasa again. Mombasa has very few open spaces where children could play, could run around, could play football, because developers, or so-called developers, have built on every open space available. And children have not been consulted in that process. And so there's no space for them. And where there's some space, it has been fenced off, and tartan has been put there for adults to play. So when do children have time to play there? They do not. And what do they do then? They play indoors, and they play games that are played indoors on their digital gadgets. And then they are likely to go the wrong way. And once in a while, they accompany their parents to the beach. And again, all sorts of things could happen at the beach. Children ought to be allowed opportunities to air this at every opportunity, not necessarily in adult organized opportunities.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Paul, for that emphasis on the need of having meaningful involvement of children in the development of this policy. And another question that has been asked is that can child protection policy stand alone, or there is need of developing other interrelated policies, looking at this point in time whereby there are varied issues around children's rights? Like, for example, you'll find that children issues there are related to education, and there are some policies that are going to be developed under the line of the Ministry or the Departments of Education. There are the issues of health. So the question is, can child protection policy stand alone, or it needs to be anchored on other relevant related policies that contributes to child's development?
My answer to that is simple. Other policies need to anchor on child protection policy. It should be the other way around. So then this is about children. And I started off by saying that it's the National Council for Children's Services, and not a department or a directorate of children's services that discusses children. It is a bigger body that discusses children. And so anything related to children, other areas, education, health, sports, registration, physical abuse and stuff, should then anchor onto a children protection policy. And in my estimation, the current policy on children's services ought to be the same framework that we work with going forward. Back to you, Nolly.
Thank you so much, Paul. And it's good to understand. You know, in many instances, children issues are perceived to be secondary issues. We discuss other adults issues, and then children issues do come later. So at this point in time, maybe I'll give you time to possibly guide us, or give us an opportunity, share with us an opinion on how we as stakeholders who might not be able to actively participate in a national convening, how we can get to organize ourselves at our respective levels, so that we too can have the voices of the communities, ourselves as a society, and of course children, feeding into the national development of this policy. So what is your advisory in terms of harnessing our thoughts, our ideas, and channeling them to the concerned office, which is the National Council for Children's Services?
Thank you very much on that. My first advice is that we're already doing fairly good work as civil society and the network, particularly on different counties. In this case, I'll talk about Mombasa, where we already have a network that already understands that there's a process in developing these policies. So it would be great for us to build on what you already have, work closely with the department or the Directorate of Children's Services, collect our views and collect the views of children, and ensure then that they're at the table of discussion in any discussion where children issues are being discussed. I think we are not very far, and quite a lot of the ideas that we already conceive and perceive are already collated and already are existing as part of this. But in order for our voice to be heard, we just need to be a little more louder. I think we've not been very loud lately, and it would be great for us to take advantage of that, be a little more louder, talk louder on behalf of children, and have children voices included in the processes going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Paul, for your time. And I don't seem to see any more questions from my end. And I know we still have time. And this clip will be available on YouTube, Sauti ya Mwambao, for viewing and for learning by other partners. Of course, we will be sharing around in our circle. So at this point in time, I'll still give it back to you. Maybe if you have anything to add, or if I may say what they'll refer to as parting shots. Paul, back to you. You have enough time, no pressure.
Thank you. I'll not add a great deal, but I just want to talk a little bit about an area that is fairly misunderstood. That is parental care. We throw it out there and say it's parents' responsibility to take care of their children. And as any parent would know, there's no manual on how to take care of children. And and so we always take care of children in the manner we were taken care of when we were children. So there's been this difficult discourse on how then can this happen. But I just wish to perhaps help us understand a few aspects which are not necessarily from any manual, but for a collection of thoughts and ideas from the past that will enable us to help children grow in safer, less violent commune, and therefore make them more responsible citizens in the coming years. The first one is children learn by seeing what we do as parents. And in our households, we often use unsavory language, violent language, and a bit of violence, even with our intimate partners, our wives and spouses. And sometimes we even discuss the neighbor in not very kind words. And we may discuss even the head teacher or the teacher of a school in not so kind words in front of our children. And so children pick up that, and though they may not use it in the manner we do, but they never forget. And when they grow up, they know that was an acceptable way of talking. So this is one of the areas that the average parent ought to just be conscious of it and learn how not to use unsavory language. The second one is we always think that the way we were brought up is the way we ought to bring up our children. And the cane was the rule of the thumb. When you use a cane against children, that is punishment. That is not discipline. Now, many children take in punishment at whatever level, even when parents are quarreling each other and they are constantly fighting. The children feel that they are being punished for some offense they made, including the fact that they were born in that household. So they sometimes wish that they could die, disappear, or not be there, that something should happen to them so that their parents could be happier. They feel that their unhappiness in their home is because they, as children, are there. So they say if our parents, when they were young and we were not available, they loved each other. But now when we start getting born, they start getting upset with us. Maybe if we were not there, they'll be happier. So the way we fight each other in the house, spousal fights and quarrels, affect children. The third thing is where the environment in which we have our children grow. And this environment include the very same household. You know, some of us from not very good circumstances share the same room with a number of children of different ages. And we, in that sharing, we quickly forget that there are children in the room. And so we do our national building activities and other parental exercise activities, ignoring that there are children in the neighborhood or that children can hear. And so when they get into early sexual debut, we are shocked that, oh, how come this has happened to us? That in itself is something that we ought to look at. The final analysis will be how we treat others. You know, not talking about them in their absence, because I could talk about our headmaster or the neighboring chief in a bad way, but how then do I treat the teacher when they come to see me? Do I still sound like they are horrible, or do I allow the policeman to come to my house and I greet him very politely? Now the moment is gone, I use very bad language about that diabolical behavior. You send wrong signals to children. First, children ought to be respectable and to respect right across the ranks. Of course, to respect according to age in terms of our culture and the way we've been brought up. But also to learn that our parents also have the same measure of respect right across. They respect elders, authority, they respect each other, and they respect opinion of children. Children enjoy when their opinions are respected, even if you finally deny them whatever they wanted, but they know you listened and you respected that. So they'll obviously be very happy with that. That is an area that we've never, as parents, really gone round. So in terms of all these areas of survival, health, education, and stuff, the area where perhaps we should derive the biggest percentage of care and protection is at the parental care or guardian care, which misses in many ways. Many of our parents, the greatest scenario is the father is fairly absent, and when he comes home, he provides food, bedding, and pays rent or has a house, and he goes away to hunt for more money and so on. And he's terrified when children don't turn out the right way that he thought. He feels he sacrificed a lot, he overworked, and yet his children are not doing the things that they ought to do at a specific stage in time. It's basically because we've lost the connection between us and our children. Now, when men are doing that, our wives are doing the other thing, the easier thing to make children grow up, the TV, the iPhone, or the phone, or payment for services done by a child, which lead to enjoyment of wrong values in society. So children start feeling like for them to do something, they ought to be paid a little, or to be accepted, acknowledged by a lot of praise, or to be punished, not disciplined, remember again, to be punished if they went wrong. And they'll take the punishment in. So these are areas that really, as a country and as a nation and as people from this neighborhood in the coast, really, we ought to relook and to make sure that then we bring out children in a safer way of doing things. We make them responsible. Personally, notwithstanding all this, I have a great appreciation of our children, and I think the next generation is going to be greater than ours because though they face more challenges, they also have capacity to deal with these challenges, perhaps than we could have done in our time. So thank you very much for that.
That is wonderful and very interesting, because I'm aware that there is an initiative that is being led by the Department of I believe Social Development on development of a parenting manual, and I'd say one infringement that has been on a high rise, based on the reports from the Child Protection Management Information System and Directorate of Children's Services, is on neglect. And maybe to get to your perspective, would an aspect of enforcement and application of the justice system on neglect issue play more, help children more, or complicate the situation? Sorry for taking you back, even though that was your parting shot.
All right. In other jurisdictions, child protection is taken maybe what I'll call a lot more seriously. In our jurisdiction, we say that traditionally we love children very much, but from casual observation, it will tell you that we hurt children deeply. You know, a very big contradiction. So perhaps, just perhaps, we could learn. I'm not so much for the idea of a nanny government, a government that also takes care of how adults take care of their children. But I'll be more happier if we reverted to a bit of communal way of taking care of children that we had in the past, where if your neighbor beats their child so hard, traditionally they'll be cautioned by the neighbor. But today, people say, "Ni mtoto wangu, it's my baby, leave my children alone with me," and someone will go on and really beat up a child until they are threatened with police action or something. And basically, this goes back to what I mentioned earlier, that we do not ordinarily take care of children in the best way it ought to be, but in the manner in which we were taken care of when we were children. So parents perhaps know no other way of doing it, but by the way it was done to them when they were children. But obviously, when it goes beyond normal discipline, when it becomes violent, it's physically violent or emotionally so, then it becomes destructive. So a measure of how we did it traditionally, culturally, will make more sense, and less of a government intrusion in the same. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It actually becomes an issue when a parent will have to be parented. I mean, when steps into care of parents. So with that, I'd want to say it's been a good session. We don't have any pending questions. We want to appreciate all those who have been following us online, and I believe this conversation can be ongoing. I'm not sure if maybe Paul will be okay to share with us a contact for your institution or your reception point, where when people might be having issues around child protection, they might be able to contact you or your organization.
Thank you very much. Trace Kenya is the organization which I work with. We are based in Twapa, and our email address is info@tracekenya.org. And you can also reach me at pauladoch@gmail.com.
Oh, so it is info at
tracekenya.org. And better copy to me at pauladoch@gmail.com.
Is it the way appearing on the screen?
Yes, correct.
Paul Adoch at gmail.com. Gmail.com.
Right.
Paul Adoch at
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you so much, Paul. I believe this is just first of the many conversations that we'll be making on diverse issues that are affecting children. Sauti ya Mwambao is a community media that is operating here from Mombasa, and we are advancing what we call journalism for social justice. So if there are any issues around human rights, rule of law, and social accountability, which as an organization you'd like to partner with us, or anybody who is part of this session today, we are always available to set up the systems in place so that we can have these conversations, and of course we can get to reach a wider and broader audience. So we are on time. We were, as you are expecting to conclude our session by 5, we are concluding 3 minutes before time, which is healthier. And I believe we've had our best, and this conversation will be ongoing. And this link will be available on Sauti ya Mwambao YouTube page. You can click, you can link on the bell, whereby you'll be able to get alerts whenever issues and programs like this are coming towards. So thank you so much for your time, and you have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.